Hello Year 6, I hope you had a wonderful half term. We had some amazing weather. Couldn't believe how hot it got. Anyway, now for another exciting instalment of The Lion Boy, Chapter 15. Charlie led the circus parade that evening. When at Macoma's insistence, he pretended to try to get on the young lion's back. The young lion had turned round and swiped at him viciously, leaving a great scratch down the side of his face. It hurt a lot. Later he had apologised. He hadn't meant to do it so hard, but it put Macoma off for the moment, and that was what mattered. So instead, clad in red velvet, gold braid, and black boots that shone like polished licorice, Charlie walked beside the lions, who were tethered with heavy chains to a great metal bar that rolled behind them. Ring boys danced ahead to clear the way, and the rest of the circus gave them plenty of room behind. The crowds gasped and flinched when they saw the six great beasts and the brown boy walking among them. They led the entire circus along the riverbank, past the island with the great cathedral of Notre Dame, where the hunchback lived, down the Rue de Riovi, my French isn't very good, Gardens du Place la Corde, down the Champs-Élysées to the Arc de Triomphe, and then he led them back again. The zebras and the horses, the learned pig pulling his twins into a little chariot, the Hungarian wearing his performing bees as a bed, the dancing girls and the bearded lady, Pirouette and the cowboys, and Major Tip on his fancy black stallion, the Lucidy family turning somersaults and cartwheels, and the band in their pale blue suits playing all the show tunes and marches in their repertoire, drums rolling and saxophones piping and glinting in the sun. They all called out and sang and handed out handbills. They were pretty tired when they got back to the ship, but as Major Tibb said in his speech when they returned, "Now everybody in Paris knows we're here, and they'll come, and they'll all bring their friends." Then when everyone went to bed, Charlie tried again to go out and check their route to the station, but again Macoma called him back. "I'm tense, boy," he said. "I've been throwing up. Massage my neck." So Charlie had to rub Macoma's strong, wiry neck and shoulders. Everyone was tense. Tomorrow the premiere, the big one, the first night. And excitement and anticipation roiled and coiled round the ship like vines, like smoke. Tomorrow at last they'd be doing the show. Charlie was tense too, but he knew what he had to do, and that made him calm. And in the meantime, despite everything, Rafi, his parents, Macoma, the imminent escape, he was really looking forward to seeing the show. Because he had never seen the show before, Charlie was allowed by Mr. Tibb to join the ring boys, who crouched right at the ringside, at the bottom of the aisles through the seating, ready to jump up and clear up between acts. Of course, when the lions came on, Charlie would have his own work to do, but in the meantime he could just squat down there and watch. First came the audience. What a crowd! They came rolling down the cobbled ramp from the Place de la Bastille to the quayside, and they were glorious, swanky ladies in big skirts, fat men in white waistcoats with sashes and medals and tailcoats, dangerous-looking fellows in long dark coats and high boots, children and mothers and fathers, skaters and punks, tough-looking big boys in worn leather trousers, a gaggle of beautiful young girls carrying balloons and flowers and presents, laughing and obviously celebrating something, red-faced people up from the country, soldiers, a priest. They were all of all colours and spoke all languages. Some Charlie recognised, English and French of course, and some Arabic. Others might have come from Mars. Charlie peered around, looking to see if he could see a lady who might be a tiger trainer, who even if she wasn't actually wearing white leather looked as if she might, but no one stood out. The Imperial ambassador's part he had taken over the great box, and were the grandest and smartest of all. Major Tibb was up there with them, shaking their hands and clicking his heels and kissing the hands of the ladies. With the caliber creeping away, luckily it was not so noisy inside the ship, and the gabbling of the crowd as they settled into their seats, the smell of the fresh sawdust from the ring, and the gentle glow of the yellow light shining down, Charlie wished that he had no troubles, that he could just be an excited kid at a circus. The music from the calippo was fading now, and the chattering of the crowd faded too. The lights began to dim, and a hush fell over the ring, over the ranks of people looking down on it, and over the performers waiting beyond the curtains for their moment to come on and dazzle the crowd. As darkness fell in the big top, there was a long moment of silence. The audience seemed to breathe as one in the dark. Then a drum roll broke out, loud and bright. Trum-da-da, dum-da-da-da, dum-dum, dum-dum-dum. At the exact moment that the band broke into a gay gallop, swirling, sweepy spotlights into different colours appeared way up above and cast their rays above the ring. Garlands and paper streamers fell from the roof in twirls of colour, and a troop of scarlet and yellow-clad tumblers began to leap and vault from the 4 entrances of the ring into the centre. One by one they hurtled in from different directions, lit by the spotlights, bouncing off their hidden springboards and somersaulting onto the mattresses in the middle. They missed each other by inches, it seemed, then leapt up, bowling and grinning, and ran back into the shadows at the edge of the ring to come bouncing up again. Some beautiful piebald ponies were brought on, and the tumblers bounced right over them, landing safe as cats, arcing their bodies and flinging their arms back into light at their own cleverness. As the acrobats took the bows, bending in the middle and dropping their heads to their knees, or doing the splits as if they were pieces of rubber, Major Tib came striding into the ring in a bright spotlight of his own. Gorgeously got up in a midnight blue tailcoat with shining gold buttons, white buckskin breeches and black leather riding boots. He was holding his long, elegant whip, and in ringing tones he proclaimed, "Ladies and gentlemen, meine Damen und Herren, welcome to Theobald's Royal Floating Circus and Equestrian Philharmonic Academy. The show of shows, the night of nights. Tonight, for your education, your temporary perturbation and your ultimate satisfaction, we have the pleasure, the honour, the unparalleled ardor to bring you the show you have all been waiting for." His honey voice was as fine and as round as a bell. He told the crowd what acts would appear and how fabulous they would be. He cracked his whip, he blew his whistle, he threw back his manly shoulders and twirled his dashing moustache, and all the men in the audience rather wished they were a bit more like Major Tibbet. And all the ladies in the audience rather wished their boyfriends and husbands were. Charlie could see that the ring boys, meanwhile, were sweeping up the streamers and garlands and pulling the leopards' mattresses out of the ring. In the darkness, while from the spotlight Major Tib extolled the magnificence of the show that was about to start. It started up with 12 zebras waltzing in rows of 3 to a beautiful tune called Zuzu's Waltz, their plump little bodies glossing and fat, and their strangely ancient-looking heads adorned with black and white plumes. They bent the stripy knees, toying and throwing, making the prettiest stripy black and white patterns as they crossed and recrossed each other. Then the lightning changed colour, which changed the colour of their white stripes, and then made pink patterns, then blue, then green, and then a mist slid out over the ring from the dry ice machines, and the zebras arranged themselves in a circle or facing inwards, bowed to each other, and carefully lay down as the mist rose up to cover them, for all the world as if they were going to sleep, and the beautiful sad tune was taken up by a lovely saxophone. The lights turned to the inside of the great striped roof of the big top. Snow was falling from the roof, but going up too, swirling, only it wasn't snow, the flakes were too big. It was fluttering doves, all different colours, and rose petals, falling and floating. Everyone gazed, entranced, as the doves and petals swirled and settled round the sleeping zebras. Not even Charlie had noticed what was going on meanwhile up in the flies. The wire guys had been preparing the next act, which Major Tib came back out to introduce. "Ladies and gentlemen," he roared, "tonight, here in Palace, at Theobald's Royal Floating Circus and Equestrian Philharmonic Academy, you're about to witness the wonderful, you're about to experience the exceptional, you're about to be implicated in the impossible, for tonight we have with us for your amusement and astoundment the one, the only, the world-famous, unique and replaceable Devil of the Air, El Diablo Aéreo. The man who can live his entire life on a wire as thin as your neck chain, madame." There he gestured magnificently to a lady in the front row, and as high as the regard in which the Imperial Ambassador held his wife, here he gestured magnificently towards the great box, and carried on without taking a breath. "In short, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I give you El Diablo Aéreo." Way up in the big top, the wire was stretched taut as a guitar string across the expanse of empty space. And at one end there was Aero, looking quite superb in a silver leotard with silver legs, holding his long, drooping balancing pole and pointing one of his toes with inexpressible elegance. First he stood there for a while, looking fabulous. Then he ran along the wire, just to show it who was boss. Then he danced along it, hopping and skipping, and he kicked off his shoes. Then 2 girls came out to join him, also in silver leotards, the twins. They tied a blindfold round his head and blindfolded. He trotted across the wire. Then he put them in a wheelbarrow and wheeled them across. Then he got out a little stove and cooked an omelette up there, flicking it like a pancake. Then they made a big hoo-ha of inviting a fellow up from the audience. In fact, one of the Imperial Ambassador's party was very keen to come, so was helped into the ring trying to look tough and confident, and then he climbed up the rope ladder to the flies, and then when he reached the platform, El Diablo Aero had a word with him, then hitched him up on his back and gently carried him piggyback over the high wire to the tiny platform on the other side. Charlie was consumed with envy. But now what? Instead of bringing him back again, El Diablo had scampered back across the high wire, leaving the fellow stranded. There was no rope ladders on the other side. Indeed, there was no way down. El Diablo and the twins were laughing, but goodness knows what the Imperial Ambassador's guest thought. Charlie bit his knuckle. El Diablo was gesturing to the man to walk back across, but the fellow, seemingly in good humour, was shaking his head and gesturing, "No way." El Diablo beckoned to his reluctant guest, but he would not be moved. Finally he took hold of a violin and began to play a sad and beautiful tune, full of minor chords crunched against each other like the beating of a broken heart. Indeed, he played so tragically that mostly people forgot he was standing on a high wire, way up in the air, trying to tempt a member of the audience to walk the high wire in his turn. Even danger itself is dazzled by how beautiful and clever the circus guys are, thought Charlie. And so it forgets to knock them down or break their necks or have a tiger bite their heads off. By now a clown had entered the ring, imitating El Diablo Aero. Julius stared. There he was, elegant with white face makeup, period clothes in a mischievous manner. He was playing his gigantic fiddle behind his back, throwing somersaults with it, playing it between his legs, then running up to the top of a 3-meter ladder to play a duet with El Diablo, still up on his high wire trying to lure the man across. By the time they were all down in the ring again, the music had turned bright and piping, and suddenly Bika Baha and the chimps came in on their bicycles. They were all wearing beautiful white silky pyjamas and white turbans with a peacock feather attached by a jewel at the front, and their bicycles were peacock blue. They did somersaults and carried each other around, waving parasols and pretending to smoke pipes. They picked up the rose petals from the ground and gave them to Birabaha, and then to members of the audience, and then 2 of them got in an argument and began eating the roses. The clowns were still larking about like nobody's business. "Here we are again, all of a lump," they cried. "How are you, Major Tib?" Major Tib came in after them. "If you please, Major Tib," said one of the fat ones, "he says that you said that I said that they said that nobody had said nothing to nobody." Julius Dad meanwhile set up a tiny little high wire and had rats running along it, dancing and stopping to eat the chocolates he was feeding them. "Who needs to cook?" he was saying. "Cooking's fancy, cooking's showing off." And he gave one of the rats his mobile phone and said it was ringing for a takeaway. And then he was trying to invite one of the ladies from the audience to join him for dinner, paying her extravagant compliments. Then when it's not being dangerous, it's just daft, Charlie thought. What a funny mixture. And then in a rush, he remembered that the rats on the high wire, were his cue. He leapt to his feet, heart pumping like a piston, and feeling proud and glad, he vaulted into the ring. He knew exactly what to do, and so like a professional, he began to pull the polished levers and wind the well-worn handles that would bring down the ring cage. For the next act was Makoma and the lions. Charlie wondered how he'd feel about watching the lions perform. He knew what they would do, had seen it often enough in rehearsal, but it would be different to see them do it in front of a crowd, as if it were all they could do, and as if Makome was incredibly brave and clever to have taught them to roll on the floor and let him pick up their paws and to roar when he told them to, as if they weren't really incredibly much cleverer than this and only humouring Makome because he fed them, and because he had fed them drugs, more to the point. Charlie thought he'd find the whole thing a bit humiliating for them and a bit embarrassing. But he didn't, far from it. He was enchanted by how strong and graceful his friends were as they entered the ring, staring down their snooty noses as they leapt around the ring. Makome looked wonderfully stern and brave in his long African robes with his rhino whip, taking the lions by the paws and making them roar, throwing their strong bodies down on the ground and lying on them. When he turned his back on the young lion for a moment, Charlie generally feared for his safety. When he harnessed the oldest lion to a small chariot and stepped into it to drive him, for a moment Charlie feared even more, because he knew what Makome did not, that the oldest lion had regained his dignity and would not care for this humiliating treatment any longer. But the oldest lion had also regained his intelligence, and he knew that in order to escape later, he had to be obedient now, so he put up with it even though he hated it. All this Charlie could see in his beautiful old fury face. Then the lions pretended to fight, and Makome separated them to gasps and shrieks from the more nervous members of the audience, and finally the lionesses did a magnificently effective trick called the bounce, which used to be done in the old days before there were ring cages. In those days, wagon cages had to be rolled into the ring, and the trainer would go inside the cage with the lions, and they would bounce around on the cage walls, running up one wall and down the other, and so on. Now the band broke into the special lion tune, Esprit de Corps by Sosa, and the lioness leapt up the side of the ring cage, not holding on with their claws, but bouncing from the cage to ground and up the wall of the cage again, like a wall of death, or like a kitten on the back of a sofa. The audience shrieked to have the great cats leap towards them, and to hear the metal rattle and shake as the great weight of the animals crashed against it, to hear the growls and see the lionesses' great paws and sleek creamy bellies. It was fantastic. It was terrifying. It was fantastic. It was the circus. And then came the interval. Charlie was mighty glad, between being in the audience and being in the show, and being constantly, silently, nervously aware of what he was to do later. He was already exhausted and exhilarated and overwhelmed, and he was only halfway through. And after that, well, he couldn't think about afterwards yet. As soon as he stowed the ring cage and helped Makome to settle the lions, he just had time to sit quietly for a moment or two on deck, breathing deeply, watching the moon with her calming stare, and reassuring himself that yes, that rope attached to the bows was the one down which they were going to run, to avoid any crowds at the gangplank, and yes, they could get to the bridge quickly, and yes, it was all petrolly lit, and the moon was not so big as to cast too much light, and yes, it was doable, and they were going to do it. He wished he'd been able to check the route all the way, but had seen how the towpath led all the way to the river, so as long as they weren't spotted, how complicated could it be? When Makome went to get himself a cup of coffee from the refreshment stall, Charlie got his bag from the rope locker and made sure his few possessions were in there. The phones, the letter and blood, his medicine, his tiger, his knife, his mum's little ball of lapis lazuli. He looked at his phone. Aha, Rathy, he thought. You didn't know where I was, did you? You didn't come and get me. He stowed as well the bits of food he had been saving from their last meals, and the packages of meat he had purloined from the meat store for the lions. He just hoped it wouldn't leak in his bag. It was all quite heavy, but the lions could help carry. He was very, very excited. End of chapter 15.